All right, we'll get started in just a minute here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose, and I have the pleasure of introducing our event this evening. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I am so pleased to welcome our guests this evening, Patrisse Khan-Cullors and Marley Dias. You can buy your copy of Patrisse's book, When They Call You a Terrorist, a story of Black Lives Matter and the power to change the world, by clicking on the link in the chat box. And thank you to our audience for submitting questions ahead of time. We will try to get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A period. And now on to the event that you're waiting for. Patrisse Khan-Cullors is an artist, organizer, and freedom fighter from Los Angeles, California. Co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and founder of the Los Angeles-based grassroots organization Dignity and Power Now, she is also a performance artist, Fulbright scholar, popular public speaker, and a Sydney Peace Prize recipient. For 20 years, Patrisse has been on the front lines of criminal justice reform and is currently leading Reform L.A. jails. Patrisse is the faculty director at Prescott College's new Social and Environmental Arts Practice MFA program, which she developed with a curriculum focusing on the intersection of art, social justice, and community organizing that is the first of its kind in the nation. This evening, we are delighted that Patrisse will be in conversation with Marley Dias, the 15-year-old founder of #1000BlackGirlBooks, an international movement to collect and donate children's books that feature Black girls as the lead character, and author of Marley Dias Gets It Done and So Can You, which is also available for purchase via the link in the chat box. Marley has spoken at the White House United State of Women, the Forbes Women's Summit, United Nations Girl Up, Inbound, CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, the Social Innovation Summit, and several others. She was honored with the Smithsonian Ingenuity Award in the Youth category in 2017 for her transformative work around the representation in literature. She was also recognized by Time as one of the 25 most influential teens in 2018 and was identified as the youngest member of the Forbes 30 Under 30 list to date. Marley resides in West Orange, New Jersey with her mother, father, and dog Billy. And now I will turn the event over to them. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much for being here to listen to us. I know we are super excited to be here. For me, it's a little bit later on the East Coast, so I'm enjoying my to finally have a nightly moment to talk with somebody about things that I care about, and to take a break from school where I'm, reminded of some things that are not focused on activism and change. And I get this moment to be with someone that I know is really focused on and thinks of things in a systemic and institutional lens. So I'm really happy to be here.
It's so good to see you, Marley.
I am so excited, but obviously we have been in conversation before and some people might have not been here for these gems. So we are helping you again and providing you with another opportunity to hear from us. But I think it's really important for us, even though we had introduction to do some other introductions. I know a lot of people can Google us and learn what they want to learn or hear what they want to hear. But what are some things you think people should know about you and your life before we kind of begin in conversation?
I love that question. I'm always asking to be in conversation with you because I remember being a young activist and how important it was to feel seen and to help inspire others. I feel like people should know that I'm really invested in youth participation in this movement, and I've done youth organizing for so much of my life, and I'm so excited about, what our generation, what a younger generation, younger millennials and Gen Zers are bringing to this moment. So I just have a lot of enthusiasm around youth activism and youth entrepreneurs and young people who are just visioning a new world for us.
I think the same thing really goes for me. When I started 1000 Black Girl Books, I never thought of myself as an activist, and I only use that term because I think it's really easy for people to understand because now we have a word for what I believed I was doing. But I think for both of us, it's really about social problem solving, and it's about solving issues that we care about and we know exist in our experiences and the experiences of people that we love and we care about. So I think one thing I want people to know about me is that, and I think for both of us, is kind of an accidental activism. Although it is clearly a part of our careers and what we strive to do and how we can help ourselves and others, it's really about doing things that make us happy so that we don't end up, tripping and falling over the same rock and facing the same obstacles and trying to solve it for other people so that we don't have to experience it ourselves and the people we love don't have to experience these problems as well.
That's right.
And even though the first question I'm supposed to ask you is when did you realize you were an activist, but I want to know when you kind of felt your own introduction to problem solving in your life, whether that's a teenager or even, being 5 years old or 10 years old.
Yeah, I think that once I became a teenager, I knew that I could change things in my society, in the society, and in my just like very intimate environment. But I feel like I was problem solving, and I love that language, much earlier on. I feel like I was like noticing issues much earlier on and trying to fix them or change them. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that I was able to cultivate that because of the educators I had in my life. But as a young person, as early as I can remember, I was already doing that. For example, when I was 9 years old, and I talk about this in my book, I was already an avid reader, but I became an avid reader because one of my teachers was teaching about the civil rights movement. And I felt like, oh, this is something that I felt really connected to. And I started to ask her to give me more books about the civil rights movement, like, young people books about it. And so I started to read those books. And then I asked my teacher if I could teach that book to the students. And I spent, my fourth grade year learning about the civil rights movement and then like creating questions, like maybe 4 or 5 questions and being in front of the classroom and teaching students about the book that I read. And that was something that I just started, that I thought up on my own. And instead of the teacher saying, no, this is not for you to do, she was very excited and inspired by it. And she encouraged that behavior in me. And I think that really has helped shape me.
Yeah, I think I've had that experience really with my mom. I got the word bossy thrown around a lot when I was a kid. And I think in general, a lot of Black girls experience that of on the report card, the talking too much, the being too direct, all of these kind of moments of adultification. But I think one thing for you, I know as a teenager, I've had moments where I feel like people are shocked that I could have an opinion about something or shocked that I can know things. And how do you think that Black girls especially really have to deal with and learn how to adjust adultification? Because I think for me, I use that experience of people treating me like an adult as a way to say things that will shock them more and more. Because I'm like, you don't think I'm capable, but then you want to put me in a category of an adult. So I think sometimes we are in spaces where we have to prove ourselves.
That's right.
I'm not really a person that believes I need to prove people wrong because I do what makes me happy. But how do you think as a teenager you were able to deal with a lot of the times hearing things about girls that look like you and having, whether it's rumors or stereotypes or standards, and kind of using that to help others and not taking that as a critique of who you are?
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a great question. And just like, yes to all of that. I think my entire K through 12 experience was saying that I talk too much. She's really bright, but she talks too much, a lot of contradictory statements about who I was as a young girl and as an adolescent. And I think for me, I just felt really, I feel like so many young Black girls are both managing the way that we're adultified and also managing the way that we're minimized, And so there's this really weird contradiction of both, being expected to be able to be a kind of responsible that children shouldn't be at the age that we are, while also being minimized for being smart or being powerful. being confident. Yes, like all of those things, I think I just have witnessed with myself and other young Black girls. And, you know, the Kimberly Crenshaw did a really brilliant job at challenging. I know we all love her.
I love her so much. Oh my gosh. And for anyone that knows this, the term intersectionality was essentially not coined, but I think you could say popularized or really brought into mass media through Kimberly Crenshaw. She is so cool. And I love that you said that, because I think a lot of people don't know her, because there is a division between academia and I think some more public or famous activists. So right. I think you brought her up.
Yeah, she's just incredible, because she's for so long has been the person to say, hey, I hear you talking about young Black men and boys, but what about Black girls and women? And how are we going to change our society's perspective around who deserves being protected? And Black women deserve protection. And I think that, you know, Black girls deserve protection, and we often don't afford us that.
I think that's a great way to segue into a question I really was thinking about, because I did a little deep dive. I started to, think more, and I was like, what can I ask her that she isn't going to expect? And I think from you talking about your family in the book, I think we learn and talk about this contradiction of Black girls having a lot of responsibility. Yes. And I can tell from what you've already told and said in interviews and from the book that you had a cumbersome amount of care that you put into your family. And obviously we already do, we always love and care for them. But I think for you, you were in a particularly different situation in the ways of your coming out story and the ways of seeing how your mother was treated, and kind of how were you able to take care of your mental health, if you did, and what do you do now that you wish you were doing as a teenager?
That's such a great question, Marley. You're so good at this. Let me tell you, audience, Marley has interviewed me like 5 times at this point, and you always have like the best questions. I didn't have a good mental health plan as a child. I was seen as, I was seen as someone that didn't need to be taken care of, that there were other people in my family who had bigger issues than me. And so I didn't have that growing up, and that really impacted me. In fact, when I first started going to therapy in my early 20s, I remember telling my mom that I was going to go to therapy, and she said, why? You don't need to, There was this idea that I was the strong one, that I was the one that, had it all together. And so it took, till my early 20s, and I'm so grateful to really take my mental health seriously and to put it at the forefront, and I battled depression and anxiety, and still do. I don't think you can be Black in this country and not battle those things, but I have such a different care plan for myself and for the people around me. I invest in therapy. I have a great chiropractor. Like, I do the things that we're taught are luxury as Black people, but it's not luxury. Our mental health is so important. Our physical health is so important, and it should be one of our first priorities. And we're often not afforded that culturally, but we're also not afforded it because we don't have universal health care, and we don't have access to adequate health care in our communities. So I've taken it really seriously, and I've prioritized it, but it's not easy to do so.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think you raised a really important point that my mom and I talk about all the time, is that, and I think you're a person that kind of symbolizes it, is the girls that were in the middle, that were kind of like the teacher's daughters, the post office workers' daughters, my mom's a professor, but she used to be an English teacher. It's like the analyst daughter. Like, we don't qualify for getting help in certain areas, and in other areas we are more privileged than other Black girls in our community.
That's right.
And it's super hard to feel like we can reach out for help because people think we have enough, but every person needs to be invested in.
That's right.
Regardless of the access they have.
That's right.
And it's super difficult, I think, for girls to get the words to do that. And I think reading is one way I've been able to get the words to feel like and learn more about the experiences of people that have so much more than I do and people that have so much less than I do. So what do you think was kind of a way that books have helped you gain perspective and realizing, like, I fall into some places where I am at the top of the system and I am getting so many benefits from what my parents had or what I've worked for, and places where you feel like there's so much disparity against your group and your community and what you care about. So kind of what books do you think influenced the way that you saw yourself?
Oh my goodness. I think it depends on my age. I was just talking earlier that I really loved, this wasn't, the center wasn't a Black girl, but I really loved The Giver as a young person, one of my favorite books. But when I got a bit older, I started reading Octavia Butler books and finally feeling like there was, a Black girl at the center of the story, and she was complicated and she was not romanticized, and you can learn more about what she was seeing through those books. And I really craved, Black women and girl protagonists that were heroines and that were, shaping society, because that's what we do in real life. We shape society. What you did, Marley, and I remember when you launched 1000 Black Girl books.
Yes, you got it right.
I was like, wait a second, let me see if I got the whole hashtag right. I remember that, and I just remember, oh my goodness, this young person is so brilliant, so amazing. What an amazing support system she must have to feel the that's just the confidence, but the to be able to feel the space up to do something like this. And I really desire that for other young Black girls. I want to live in a world where young Black girls aren't feeling like they have to shrink themselves, where they have to fit into a certain box or certain standard of image. I love that you're showing up with a fro today. It makes me so happy. It makes me so proud. I was talking earlier with a good friend. I was actually on the radio. She is a friend, but I was on the radio, and we were talking about growing up, getting our hair pressed religiously, and what that did to us as young girls. And I don't have a problem with anybody straightening their hair, but when you feel like that's the only way to wear your hair,
yeah,
exactly, it's really dangerous. And so having books, that helped me see myself in different ways. I think I remember not having it, and I remember when the minute that world opened up for me, reading those books and what they meant to me and how they actually helped me sustain myself.
Yeah, I think for me, books are obviously a very important tool, but you mentioning Octavia Butler is super great, because for my summer reading 2 years ago, I had to read Kindred. And to be honest, I had shied away from Kindred because in my public school system, the use of the term slaves and acting like that they're the identity of being a slave is your whole identity had always been something that annoyed me. My mom is a sociologist, so she always gave me the words to know that it wasn't true. So I would just be annoyed sitting in history class, like, well, we don't have to call enslaved African slaves because they are still people. They are, it's kind of this division of humanity when it comes to enslavement and treating it as though it was an economic benefit and it helped this and this, and it just bothered me a lot. So I always shied away from reading stories about enslavement because it just made me unhappy. I didn't feel like there was a way to see that in a way that empowered me or made me excited. But then I had to read Kindred, and I was like, this is so good. Finally, we got a good one, because I was sick and tired of seeing these stories. I mean, obviously, I've been sick and tired of a lot of things now that just talked about enslavement in a way that was frustrating, and it didn't feel like there was, not to say anything helpful or happy, but liberating or exciting about learning about this process and the ways in which Black people have kind of been oppressed and how we're still fighting that today. And I saw so many connections in the experiences of Black girls dealing with white men and feeling as though you have bright ideas and can't express them. That's right. I related to a story that I never thought I would be able to relate to. But I have a very special question for you, and I feel like I've given you some hard ones, but I was going through Google and I was like, let me find some very old interviews. So on December 20th, 2016, you did a TED interview with Alicia and Opal. You guys were sitting down and you were sitting on the couch. You were in the very middle and you were asked about leadership, which I think you were really just touching on. So I wanted to bring this up now. And you said, I wrote it down verbatim, we have to invest in Black leadership. What we've seen is thousands of Black people showing up for our lives with very little infrastructure and little support. You did that in 2016. I still think that really resonates with what we've seen this year and basically every year, although for some people they feel like it's just this year. But it's been every year for a very long time. But how do you feel like that quote might have changed? And if you feel like there's more infrastructure and more support?
Oh my God, you're so good. Everybody watching this, take notes. Marley Dias, you need to have, I mean, you do have your own show. I think when I was saying that in 2016, that was after a few years of being knee deep in our movement and feeling like so much of what was happening in our world was only what we were holding the burden as Black people, and that, you know, people were only interested in the headlines for 2 seconds and then we're leaving or stepping away, and that there wasn't enough people involved, you know, non-Black people involved in really fighting for our lives and showing up for our lives. I will say this, 2020 feels different. It's not, we need to do more, and we need to stay on the track of supporting Black people and their visions, whether it's creatives or organizers or mental health professionals or healthcare professionals, you know, across the board. Dismantling institutionalized racism takes the work of all of us. But I do feel like there has been more support and more resources going into Black-led infrastructures. Doesn't mean it's enough, but we're not where we were in 2016. And I think people are feeling an obligation in a good way to show up differently for Black people. My big takeaway is we have to continue to do the work even when the media we're no longer the headlines. We're no longer the folks that are, you know, being seen in the media. We need everybody to keep the conversation going and keep pushing and challenging institutionalized racism.
I would 100% agree. I think that obviously I've been successful because of the media caring about what I do, but it's also been self-motivation. Like, I did this for 9 more months. Obviously, as a kid, for me, a 10-year-old, 9 months felt like 10 years. So committing to something when it wasn't successful is still a part of that commitment. And I think it really shows to people that I didn't get a call to be on a big TV show and then decide to start. I started and then these things happen. And I don't think it defines my work. I only think it elevates it. And I think that difference is really important for a lot of people to know. And that kind of leads me to asking about performative activism. I think this is not a question that I just kind of thought of right now, but I think a lot of brands, even when it comes to LGBTQ representation or talking about Black Lives Matter, may release a statement or a quote or change their profile picture to Black Lives Matter or put a rainbow in their logo. And how do you think that brands can actually be committed to understanding the institutions they're a part of and how to better their representation and kind of better their work environment and what they kind of show to their consumers?
Yeah, perfect question. I mean, I think number one, just because a brand gives money to Black Lives Matter, our organization, or, you know, any organization in our movement, doesn't mean that it's proving that Black Lives Matter inside of their company. You know, it's really important that CEOs and executive leadership in companies start to look around to see who's in leadership. If you're in a board meeting and there are no folks of color, and especially no Black people, then you need to reevaluate what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's no reason that any of our companies should not be as diverse as our societies. There's no reason why we should be working in racial monoliths, or having the token Black person. That's unacceptable. So we have to, companies and brands have to reevaluate, recreate, redesign, and then start working differently inside of their systems.
I completely agree. I think it's difficult to know the intentions of a company when just looking at their social media pages. But if you go to their About Me or Who We Are, a lot of the times they don't reflect what they aim to do or the people they aim to help.
That's right.
Like my dad works for a grocery store company, and he focuses on food deserts and making sure that there are areas in Black and brown communities that have grocery stores, because it is an essential part of our rights, even though it's not in the Declaration of Independence or anything like that. We need to make sure that everybody has healthy food. That's right. And especially Black people who mainly become athletes, become entertainers, become pop culture icons, are able to feel as though they are fueled to be successful in their lives. And I think for him being one of the only Black people working in this specific area and being one of the only people that was impoverished and knew what it was like to live in a food desert, to now being one of the only Black analysts, is something that's hard for him to deal with. And I think for a lot of Black people, and my mom has many friends and many of my aunties are the onlys that are working for companies that are posting statements that say, we support and we are allies, when they don't have many allies or communities for the Black people in their companies.
That's right.
And I think for you as like kind of an entrepreneur, I think it's different. But how do you include, and I think this is a funny question to kind of ask, but how do you include like white voices in Black Lives Matter? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
It's a weird question to ask. And I think it's like not an anticipated question, but I think it's important to think about. We need to have, and like you said earlier, we need to have white people that care about this too and are representative of it too. So how do you find that balance? Because you don't want a white person speaking for you, but rather with you.
That's great. Well, you know, I really rely on organizations like White People for Black Lives or SURGE, Standing Up for Racial Justice, which are white allied groups that are intentionally allying themselves with Black people and with Black movements. That is critical. And when you're able to work with an ally group that is able to see the vision and follow the vision of Black people, it makes all the difference. And so, you know, it really pushes white people to organize themselves and their people, pushes them to be the teachers of other white people around racism and how systemic racism works and how racism plays out in interpersonal relationships. And I think through that experience with white people being each other's support system, they are better equipped to work inside of Black spaces and Black-led spaces. So that to me feels like the way we do that.
I completely agree with you. And I know it can be tough because I think for me, like I work pretty independently. I think my mom is the only other representative I could say that really kind of knows or understands. And a lot of people want to practice allyship, but they don't feel like it's something that they can do. And I also think that race should not be a sensitive topic to so many people. I think it's very weird. I think as a Black person, it's very weird to see white people be uncomfortable about race when they experience many of the benefits of being their own race. But we have some audience questions, and I think this one from CJ in Los Angeles asks, how can we better ourselves to be a better example to others? So I know that this isn't, I don't know if CJ's white or Black or anything, but how do we better ourselves to be a representative of our people and to support others, even if they don't share our experiences?
I think it depends. I like this question, and I want to say this. There are different categories of people and where they situate themselves in your lives. If you're talking about people you want to build family and community with, then I actually do think people should be extending a time and space for people to be in relationship with each other. I do think that it's really important, you know, if you're in a community that is different than yours, but you have people that you love and that community, that there should be time that you spend together and really creating that community together. But I will say that it doesn't benefit us to reach across the aisle with known white supremacists, with people who are trolling us. Those are not people you reach across the aisle with. That's not the way that you build unity. I'm really invested in people who are in my community in life that I see as people that are going to be with me for the long haul and the long run. You know, people like my mom, people like my siblings, people like good friends of mine who I love and adore, and they may not be Black, and they have a great heart. They just need some more, you know, they need to learn, and they need to be a part of a learning process alongside of me. So I think everyone needs to decide who they do that community family with and how they're investing in those kinds of conversations, relationships, versus say the troll or the bot or the racist that is actively going after you and your community.
Yeah, well, I don't think, and I wasn't asked the question, but I don't think you should try to bridge the gap with people that have made hate or benefited from hating other people. I just don't, that's not fun for anybody. It is not fun for anybody. And I think making conscious decisions and I think for both of us we've had to dream of a world where things are better. We've had to imagine a world where things can exist more peacefully and then work to create that. And that leads me to a question from Stella in Los Angeles. And she says, how can we imagine a new future for ourselves when we're afraid to even begin dreaming? And how can we stop ourselves from feeling defeatist about the current system that we live/exist in? I have struggled with this as well. I think it's definitely hard to feel like you can be a part of a change of something and kind of your own self-motivation, which I know can sound corny sometimes, but how do you pick yourself up in moments where things seem really doubtful?
I hang out with friends who make me laugh. The world is too intense, and we are living in the most precarious times I've ever lived in. And if I solely focused on what was happening at the national level, or the fact that we're living in a global pandemic, or that, I don't know how safe it is to be Black in this country, I don't know if I would survive. It's not survivable, everything that's happening. And so I need to put myself in places that make me feel alive and well. And my child does that for me. Laughing with my friends and family does that for me. Watching people in my life who I love and adore, like you, Marley, doing amazing work in the world, does that for me. You have to find what brings you joy. We have to cultivate joy. At the end of the day, with everything that's happening, we have to cultivate that joy. Just like joy isn't and happiness aren't like just things that happen to you. We get to decide how joyful we are and how we cultivate that joy.
You are making my mom smile ear to ear. I can see her in the little, she's sitting down on a beanbag right now, and she has a book coming out next year called Parent Like It Matters, How to Raise Joyful, Change-Making Girls. So it's like, I think that's my mom's whole kind of thing for me. And I think for a lot of people that are surprised that I might have the motivation or drive, that I do things that make me happy. I do it because I'm passionate about it. I didn't choose to talk about reading if I hated books. I chose it because they motivate me and they make me happy, and I want to be happy when I read them.
That's right.
And I think that, you sending me a copy of your book made me so very, very happy. And I also got a very nice necklace. It didn't match my outfit today, but I was thinking about wearing it. And it says, "We are Stardust." And Elaine from Rockville, Maryland wanted to know, why do you say I am Stardust?
Because we come from the stars. We have literal parts of our body that match the elements inside of the stars. It reminds me how connected everything is, not just human beings, not just the human race, but every single being on this planet, both in the seas and in the skies. We are deeply connected, and we can't forget that these magical things that we see at night, if we're lucky, these magical blinking things that we see at night, that we are also that we are these magical blinking beings that are light, and that are beautiful, and that are magnificent, and that are brilliant. And I never want to forget that for myself, and I never want to forget that for my child.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and kind of keeping that alive, like that feeling alive, because I know that for me, I can feel like sometimes I don't feel like I'm always as important or confident or worthy in my ideas. And we had an audience question I think really just ties into what you were just saying. Ashley said, just watching, reading, and hearing about the terror and injustice inflicted on Black and brown people is exhausting, disheartening, and maddening, which I think we can all agree with today. And as someone on the front lines, and thank you for being an essential worker, you count as an essential worker for me. What do you do to self-care and find your strength to keep fighting? So how do you keep that stardustness alive?
Therapy, and like I said earlier, friend time, a good friend hangout where you belly laugh so hard that you gotta hang up the phone or hang up the Zoom and just take a break because your stomach hurts so bad. That's my favorite kind of laughter. When I have to get up and run across the house to laugh and laugh it off, that's my favorite kind of laughter. Dancing in my room and just being silly and goofy, and staying connected. It's, when quarantine happened, it was so disorienting. but staying connected with my friends. I'm on multiple group threads, and those give me life.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, connection is something that they feel like they need to make up for, and they have a lot of time lost that they're trying to bring back as we can hopefully slowly transition into less maddening and less disheartening moments. And as I talked about my journey into learning more about you, I think the book really highlights the importance of family in your life and the significance even when it was hard.
Yes.
And some of the more personal moments that you've had that I think they show more of your character and who you are and what you believe in, because you have, and in my opinion, out of many of the activists that I look up to and have watched, you have your hands in so many different places and you are helping to plant so many different seeds. You talk about the reinvesting of money in the police and fixing school systems and making sure that people vote. There were so many articles of you because I was trying to figure out what was she doing a year ago from today that I can ask her about? And you were already doing things to encourage people to vote in the 2020 election in 2018, in 2019. And there were so many articles about that. I was beyond impressed because I think right now a lot of people are pushing for voting, but you have always cared about that. And I think you understand your rights a lot. And my favorite thing that I got to read of yours was actually an op-ed you did for the LA Times about the Los Angeles County jails and policing reform.
Yes.
I'm an only child, and I don't think I have, and I live in a white, middle class, upper middle class neighborhood. I don't know anybody that's been in jail. I have not experienced these things.
Thank God.
I think, I mean, yes, it is one of my privileges, just like we were talking about. I really do fall into the middle, leaning up towards being away from these things. But I think my mom has always tried to make me aware of those things, and she's done a good job in some ways. We went to the Czech Republic a couple months when I was like 7 years old, and she made me watch Roots the entire time. So I was surrounded by white people.
It sounds like what my mom has done.
And then just made me watch the most gore invested scary thing about how Black people can exist around white people. And and I think you in some ways have been that iPad that's showing young kids roots and making them aware of these things, not in a way to scare them, but to make them feel educated on those things. And that op-ed, I think, did a great job for me as someone that has no experience of watching this happen. And you were talking about your brother, Monty, who is hopefully doing well. I heard about earlier, and I'm glad he's doing well. But two other men in LA County jails, one named John Horton, who died in his cell in 2009, and Juan Carrera, who was pepper sprayed and then went into distress and passed away later that day. So my question about that is really, I am not a part of the system, and I have not been a victim of anything that is really related to policing or police violence or the mass incarceration. But how do people that are not involved in kind of traumatic events that relate to a system understand and learn more about it? I think, I am not a victim of many things that hurt people that I care about and that I love. And how am I able to not necessarily put myself in their shoes, but to learn about these things without having to go through it? Because we don't want everyone to experience something bad to care about it. We want them to see these things happening and then feel empowered enough to help those people.
Well, Marley, you are the living example of that. I have been in so many interviews where I could tell the person who was interviewing me did not prep and are, they're excited to talk to me, but they don't know half the things that I believe in. And the way that folks on this call can really learn about what's happening to communities is be interested, be curious. If you hear about county jails, maybe you don't have anyone in it. Well, look it up. What is your county jail doing? Your mom was talking about the Daily Digest earlier, and one of the call to actions I made to people during one of my Daily Digests was saying, look up how your county jail is dealing with COVID-19. If you don't have a loved one inside a jail or a prison, if you don't know about how jail and prisons work, you honestly don't realize, what about the people in jail and COVID-19? Like, there's no social distancing that can happen there. So what's happening? And it was beautiful because so many people actually did that. And they were, messaging me on Daily Digest saying, I didn't realize that, our county jail system wasn't doing a good job. And so I think people have to self-educate. There's no excuse anymore to be ignorant to what's happening unless you are trying to be ignorant. You got to self-educate. You have to learn Fox News should not be the sole news channel that you watch. You should be looking things up. You should be researching. And if you ever read something that is intentionally making you feel hysteria, where the intention is to make you feel hysterical, that's probably misinformation and disinformation. There are ways in which misinformation and disinformation spreads in our society, especially around Black Lives Matter, and it's usually something that is going to cause a mass hysteria, cause hysteria inside of you. And so we have to be mindful of the ways that we're often tricked into believing something based off of extreme fear. That is not the way to consume information, and that's not way information that should be given as well.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, especially I can say for kids my age, I was in middle school during the 2016 election. So we weren't learning. I did not learn about the senators that were running. I didn't learn about my mayor and my town council and my board of education. We were completely shadowed by hearing about fake news and the media and this and this and this. And there was a lot of fear mongering, which I think really does still exist today. You know, I covered the presidential debate for my school newspaper. Someone should have told me there were no commercials, because I was having a panic attack trying to take down all these notes and hearing these, like, all these sentences that never finished. And I was freaking out. and it was hard for me to do. But I think for a lot of people in our everyday lives, being socially observant matters. And that is something that you have to personally initiate yourself. You have to do that. I think any person has to do that. And it's super critical that we take those steps to just be curious about things and to have opinions. And my advice for all young girls and any person that wants to change the world is to start to develop opinions based on facts. Because for me, my experience in developing 1000 Black Girl Books comes from me liking to read and not seeing myself. But then I learned that there is not enough books being published, that curriculums are not being edited and updated until like 40 years later. And it's taking steps to learn about things you care about, and then to learn about things you've never heard about before. And I think for a lot of people that want to become social problem solvers, I'm not using activists anymore, that want to become social problem solvers, how do they start out? How do they learn to be socially observant? And I think for a lot of kids, and I know might not be a lot of kids in this conversation or listening, for parents that might disagree with their kids, how do we learn to stand out even when we hear these fear-mongering and hysterical statements, and how do we start on that journey to becoming more socially observant?
Number one, think about the thing that keeps you up at night. What is that issue that you feel very moved by? What do you feel like is most important? What's the contribution you want to make? And then find an organization that's doing that work. Find a place where you can volunteer, where you could support. If that thing doesn't exist, start something. You and I both started something because it didn't exist, right? So first you got to do the research to see if it already exists. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but if it doesn't, then you start it. And I think that's really powerful. We think that we have to wait on elected officials, that we have to wait on everybody else to save us. No one's going to save us. We are going to save ourselves. We always have, over and over and over again.
I really agree. I think that there's a really important thing in coalition building and working in communities, but it's also really important to kind of take your own initiative and not wait for somebody else. It can be really hard to know, but the internet, there's no excuse with the internet anymore. There is no excuse. And I am a child of the internet, so I feel like it's a lot easier for me to say that. Like my parents and I were just talking about, like, if COVID happened when they were in high school, they wouldn't have school. There was no way. They would get one big packet and there would be no school. It would just be like an opportunity for them to not be connected. And I think this connection can help people and can also hurt people.
That's right.
And for you especially, because, you know, I watch some YouTube videos and comments are not nice anywhere on the internet. How have you learned to deal with that, and to kind of, to not take that as a definition of your character, or to not take things that people say as a defining part of what you believe in and what you want to do?
It's hard, you know. I definitely, I've been receiving hate mail and death threats probably since 2015, 2016, you know, when BLM became very big in the media. And this time around, definitely receiving similar, having a similar experience. It's amplified a bit more, they're calling us witches now, which is really intense. But I think that what I try to remember is that some of the most brilliant and amazing civil rights leaders were treated like garbage. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, his approval ratings in the US was like 27%. We still misunderstand Malcolm X. Most people don't even know who Ella Baker is, who Fannie Lou Hamer is. And so in some ways, I just try to rely on the past and remember that I'm a part of this legacy. But I'll be lying if I didn't say that it doesn't impact me sometimes. Like, I was so grateful, you said yes to this, because I was like, I hope Marley and her family are not like, oh man, y'all BLM is being called all these types of names. We don't want to associate.
No, never.
There are these moments where I feel like, man, and especially if I watch it, like Tucker Carlson did a really terrible, thing on Fox News on me and Kamala. And if I watch them, I'm like, that's really mean. Like, you're saying mean things about me. I'm still a human being. So I try not to watch it. I try not to watch or read, the way in which the media tries to spin what I'm doing and who I am and what we are doing and who we are. And just try to stay committed. Like, I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm helping save lives. I know that I'm supported. I know that I have so many people who have my back, and try to just stay in that place so I don't get consumed by the hate.
Yeah, I think that consumption for me is different because I have my parents to protect me from those things. And I also don't, like, I've seen other people have those experiences. It's good that you mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer, because she said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's where, my slogan comes from, or whatever you want to call it. And it's really important that those names are brought to light. And one way we can do that is through schools. Like, public schools are a way that these names can be introduced, that we can talk about and not talk about Columbus and then completely rewrite the story 5 years later. We need to make sure that our public schools are going through this similar process of being vetted for the information they spread to children. And one of my favorite questions really is from Callie in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She says, first, thank you, Patrisse, for your leadership, work, vision, and voice. I will echo that statement. And second, do you think that K through 12 public education ought to undergo the same kind of defunding or refunding and critical reimagining of our policing institutions do and should? So, like, I'm not going to answer the question, but I think it's really about looking, what are we telling our children, and how are we making sure they get equitable education? And you have a child now, and what do you hope for your child to see when they go to school?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing that I'll say about that is we need a complete restructuring of our public education system. I think ethnic studies should be a requirement K through 12. We shouldn't be waiting for young people to have to go to college and make a decision whether or not they take ethnic studies. I think it should be baked into the educational system. I think we should learn about the ways this country has harmed Indigenous people and has impacted Black lives, and that we should teach about social movements and what they've really done and how they've really created new spaces. People talk about free breakfast programs. They don't realize that the Panther Party actually created that infrastructure so we could have free breakfast programs.
That is correct. And I wish we didn't learn about that in school until, like, my teacher showed one random video and it just happened to be in it. But a lot of these things are not prioritized at all.
No, we don't prioritize teaching children things that will help them be adults. Exactly. We just don't. It's not the priority. It's standardization, it's testing requirements. It's really, a corporate system inside public schools, and it's a punishment system. So what you end up having are young people who don't end up learning anything. They don't know the Constitution. They don't know, unless their families are teaching it. They don't know.
My family.
Exactly.
Had that liberty.
You're probably the anomaly. And that's also isolating, right? Like, you're looking around, you're like, why don't y'all know this? Because they should. The school should be teaching it. And so I think, you know, we do need to recreate the school environment, and we need to call on, you know, federal and national, I mean, federal, state, and local government to really fund adequate public education.
I love that. And I go to public school, which some people don't expect, which I can understand. And I don't like that people say that, because that means they don't think public school gives kids enough words, because they don't think a publicly educated child could be an empowered child.
Right.
And when they say that to me, I'm like, I know what you're thinking, even if you don't really, you know, mean it that way. And this is supposed to be my last question. So this is my biggest question, in my opinion, is kind of I know that everyone tonight is going to be buying your book and reading a copy, but what do you think is the thesis statement of When They Call You a Terrorist? And what do you think is the core when you got the opportunity to write a book, or you started, you know, making your Word documents and putting down ideas? What did you want to be at that core, especially for young adults?
That we need to honor young leaders, and that we never know what someone's going to grow up to be. And if we invest in young Black people in particular, and if we really create a society that's investing in the treasure and the resilience of young Black people, we will see a beautiful recreated society. That is really the thesis of When They Call You a Terrorist, that we must not undermine young Black people, that we have to invest and support them with our whole bodies and our whole hearts.
I love that thesis statement. That's the best essay you could ever write. You know, I am someone that will benefit from ideas like that. So I appreciate you standing up for Black kids, Black youth, Black people, our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. And I think what you've done is super inspiring and motivating for me, because when I started, I didn't think there was anybody else in the world that cared about Black girls. I really felt like I was the only one, because I'm 10 years old, I got my phone, but I don't really know how to go on the internet. I'm not looking at these things. I feel like I'm in a bubble sometimes of feeling like the only. And I think we all can struggle with that in our own lives. And I know that I'm closing up, so I want to express my gratitude to you, and to say that this book, for all people, and especially Black people, is a way to understand more about the importance of investments in youth, the importance and investments of knowledge, of learning how to solve problems, of learning how to care for others and yourself, of learning how to balance who you are. And it's really important that we focus on that. So I'm calling Heidi back to the Zoom call stage, because I know she has something she'd like to say.
You're the best, Marley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You both of you, thank you so much. That was such a dynamic and inspiring conversation. I wrote down all these notes for myself so I can go back and just refer to them. So I learned so much from this conversation, and I really appreciate the both of you being here so much. You can go to the chat box and still get a copy of Patrisse's book, When They Call You a Terrorist. It is such an important book. It will stay with you. I just cannot recommend it enough. So thanks to both of you for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your words. Thank you for all the work you're doing. We really appreciate it for you being here tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you, team.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you
Good night, everybody. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
Thanks.